All right, welcome. It's January 29, 2011. We're here for a session for balancing faculty and student rights. I'm Fredman Hartesveldt, Faculty Association President. With me is Sara, Dorer. Associate Director of Student Conduct is half of her title. And we also have Litrin Burris with us, who handles grievances for the Faculty Association. And I should let you know we have a student reporter in the room because this is a matter of interest to the students too. So we probably have, I don't know, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes of a presentation. We are trying to use a lot of time for question and answer. And what we hope to do is draw out the line and the balancing between student rights in their conduct within the classroom and faculty's ability to address that conduct. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Sara.
Holly's also.
Oh, I'm sorry. Holly Hoare, who also handles grievances for the Faculty Association, has just joined us. So we can hopefully field questions that you might have. And this is being recorded. We have a crowd of less than 1,000, and I know that people do pick it up online.
Thank you, Fred. I'm all set, right? If you can hear me. Can you hear me? All right. Thanks for coming. I want to try to give you a little brief introduction. I think many of you have been to one of my sessions before, or at least have worked with me before, so we won't spend too much time on the code of conduct itself, and we'll jump right into the classroom management, faculty rights piece of it. But for a few of you that may be new to me, again, I am Sara Dorer, Associate Director of Student Conduct. The other half is Student Satisfaction Initiatives. I work primarily in student affairs and doing a whole bunch of different things. And while student conduct is 90+% of my job, I'm also working with the behavioral intervention team very closely, so we can talk about that a little bit as we go through this in terms of if you see something, say something, and reporting behaviors of possible concern that aren't conduct related. And I work just on a number of different teams on campus. So we can get into the different roles if you have questions about those as well. But our primary focus today is to talk about classroom management and dealing with students of concern and trying to figure out. I have a question on my desk right now from a faculty member I've left a message for that says, what are my rights? What is the policy? What can I do with this situation? And so that's what we want to talk about today. If you haven't had a chance to look at the Code of Conduct, it is online in full version. I also brought, and you can pick one up afterwards if you want, the mini version of the Code of Conduct. It's kind of the go-to reference that will help you understand the code policies and what students are held to. The code is broken up into three primary areas: the academic dishonesty, the classroom conduct, and the general conduct. And most of the situations that I'm dealing with faculty involve the classroom misconduct and the academic dishonesty. What I want you to know is if you look at that online code, it outlines very clearly for you what the student rights are and what your rights are. So make sure you've taken a look at that if you haven't yet. And it is online, and if we have time before the end of today, I'll also show you how online we have a video, thanks to Media Productions, that is a quick 3-minute introduction for our students about what we do expect from them, what behavior we're looking for on campus, and it can be a great way to start your class and discuss your expectations from the beginning. If you haven't seen that or used that, that can be a nice tool to just kind of get things kicked off in class. I want to make sure, I had some conversation with Litrin and Holly and Fred recently. We were talking through this process, and they said, you know, that's something you should share. What people, I hope, understand about my job and my role is it's not meant to be punitive. It's looked at that sometimes, especially when the students feel like they're coming to the principal's office. It is meant to be an educational process. That is the goal around our code of conduct. It's an educational process. So when a student is sent to me, my goal is not to kick them out of school, to kick them out of the class right away. My goal is to educate them, help them understand what behaviors we are expecting of them, so that they can be successful in our environment. So that's the ultimate goal, and hopefully will be the goal in the classroom too that you're working with in terms of when you're seeing the disruptive behavior, we want to educate them very clearly and directly about what we expect from them to see if they can do it. Now if they can't, that's when they come to me and we work on moving them on into a different environment where they're ready to do what they need to do. So we're going to talk very specifically about setting the stage. I want you to know we can hold all the questions to the end, or you can feel free to jump in. If I say something and you're like, wait, I've got a question about that right now, feel free to jump in and ask. And hopefully we'll get some examples as we go from people who have been doing this. But the biggest thing, this honestly, setting the stage is the biggest part of dealing with classroom management. Because if you have set the stage well, if you have outlined in your syllabus what you expect from your students, and then something happens, it is very clear and easy how we're going to move forward from that. The hardest situations are when I have a faculty member call and say, here's the situation I'm dealing with, what do I do? And I say, okay, well, tell me what's in your syllabus. And they say, well, nothing really. Okay, and what have you told the student so far or warned the student so far about their behavior? Well, nothing really. We don't have much to work on at that point. So setting the stage is the critical point in everything that we're going to do in a sense. Setting the stage and then responding immediately. Those are the two things I would say walk away with. So what you want to make sure you're doing is figuring out. If you haven't articulated in your syllabus what your policies are, you want to do that. Now, we'll show you an example in a minute. Those range. Everybody has a different system of what they want to do. You've got to find your voice. You've got to figure out what that's going to look like from you, but you do need to come up with something. For me, I do teach CLS 100, and I very simply explain, I expect respect, and I list a couple of things, and then outline that you are held to the code of conduct, and there will be consequences if you can't maintain this environment, sort of thing. So I do something very brief. Litrin has an example if you'd like to see after class. She has a 3-page syllabus about her policies and expectations. I mean, this isn't her syllabus. This is just her classroom expectations. So now, again, everybody's teaching different courses and has different levels of students in their classes and whatnot. We obviously, at some of our more entry-level courses, more of our developmental courses, they're dealing with more behavior as the students are first starting with us and they're just figuring out what is it that we expect. By the time they get into some of those higher, organic chem, they've been here a little longer. They probably know a little bit more about what we're expecting from them. So depending on what you teach and what you've experienced, you can figure out what your voice needs to be in your syllabus. You want to set high expectations and you want to be clear, but you also want to be reasonable. And so that's one thing that you have to kind of balance as well. There are going to be situations where we have students who have children in daycare or in school that they may have to respond if the child is sick and needs to be pulled out. So you need to figure out how are you going to manage that. Obviously, cell phones are not allowed in the classroom, but how will you handle that exception, that student who does need something a little bit different than our other students, and how are you going to address that with them? Now, some faculty will say, absolutely not, you may not look at your cell phone. Others will say, if you've made me aware of the fact that you have kids in child care, and you keep it on vibrate so no one else can hear it, and I know that that's the case, I know you may have to excuse yourself if that's the person calling you. So you've worked that out. Litrin, I believe, says that pretty clearly is what I just said. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I also have students who have family situations. I had a young man.
Wait.
Because it's recorded, we're going to make you use the mic.
I had a student last semester who was taking care of 2 ill parents, he and his brother. The father has Alzheimer's, and I think the mother has multiple sclerosis and is blind. And if there was any sense of medication, he was the guardian because he was the older brother, and therefore he would get the phone call. So he spoke to me on the very first day because I encouraged that, and I allowed him to put his phone on vibrate, and he could step out and take the call, and then he could come back in. So I do, even though my syllabus is very strict, it does allow for flexibility if I'm aware of that. And that would be the same if someone has young children in school or in daycare where they have to go and get the child and remove them, or if there's a situation that's an emergency. So I do make those exceptions.
And I think that this is one of the most challenging things. When I think I have it up here that says, I think it'll be in a minute. You have to be strict. You have to be on these things, but flexible at the same time. And that can be a hard balance to find. So thinking through some of those things and how you want to handle them can be helpful. And talking to others about how they handle those situations can be helpful. And knowing when you think, well, maybe I shouldn't have to make an exception and I should talk to somebody about this, because we get a lot of students, for instance, who are on probation or may have tethers or something of that sort. And they may come in and say, well, my probation officer's calling. I have to leave class to answer the phone because if I don't, I'm going to get, go back to jail. Okay, only sort of true. Yes, they have to answer the phone when their probation officer is calling. But over 9 times out of 10 that I have worked with students in those situations, you can talk to them and say, you need to make your probation officer aware of your class schedule and make them aware of the fact that you're not allowed to answer your phone when you're in my class, and this is the time frame. I have only run into, in the 2 years that I've been here, I've only run into one probation officer that was not willing to work with the student in that situation. So you need to help them understand that's their responsibility, not yours, and that they may not miss class for that. So there are certain, you kind of have to feel out the expectations and the exceptions that you have for students. But there are a lot of students coming with a lot of different life issues. So as clear as we can be and as consistent as we can be, there's always going to be a student who's got a loophole we haven't seen before. And so we're kind of always processing that. We're going to recommend that you do put something in your syllabus. Something I hadn't thought about, but Litrin brought up in our conversations earlier, is that it is a good idea at times to explain why you have certain rules. And you don't have to go into every single policy and every single rule, but if you have a rule about, I will not take papers after 11:30 on Friday, was the example Litrin used, and students challenged that, why so specific, helping them see that, well, if I make an exception and one person turns it in at 11:35, well, then shouldn't I make an exception for the person that turns it at 12:05? And then what about the next person? That there has to be a cutoff somewhere. And that reasonably, for you to grade the materials and get it back to them on time and to process it the way they want in a fair way for everybody, you have to set certain expectations. It may seem silly that we have to line out our expectations so clearly and that we have to explain them. And I recognize that, especially when you've been teaching for years. I will tell you that this current generation needs that a little bit more than maybe in the past. This understanding for really getting clear expectations is critical for this current generation. They may not understand the level of respect and current learning that you believe belongs in the classroom. They have always had these cell phones. They are tethered to these cell phones. They do not understand why it is a problem to text message in your class. So if that is a policy you have, you need to help them understand why, okay? And hopefully they're going to start hearing it enough that they're not going to need that explanation eventually, that people are really going to be consistently enforcing these things. But right now they're still challenging those things, and it's important that they do understand why you have certain rules. And if that to you is the proper learning environment, they need to understand that. And I say that too because I have had faculty in my sessions who say they don't care. And so it is important to know that every faculty member is coming from a different place and they are getting different expectations in different places on campus. There are a number of faculty members who say, if you text during class, if you sleep during class or whatever, I don't care, that's your time, it's your money, I don't care what that does to my classroom environment. There are other faculty that say absolutely not. So they are getting what to them feels like mixed messages about what the classroom environment looks like. So they need to know what your learning environment looks like. And ultimately helping them understand that we are creating the space for respect and safety for all of our students, that all of our students deserve that opportunity to learn in a respectful and safe environment. So these are some basic syllabus statements you could look at implementing, something just very basically that refers to the code of conduct and gives them the link. Some people are choosing to do something about the tobacco-free campus and include the link there. But these would be a couple of policies I would suggest you think about if you haven't, even if it's a one-sentence statement or 2 sentences that kind of address your policies around electronics, around absenteeism or tardies, and around late work. Those seem to be the 3 things that kind of come up pretty regularly. And what happens, what is your policy in terms of if you're using your electronic device, and then what's going to happen if I don't follow that? What are you going to do? And we're going to talk about what you can do and what you want to do with that. This is an example from Fred. So this is something that he puts on his, which obviously is shorter and a little bit more to the point, maybe specifically for him, than what Litrin does. But again, they're teaching different students, or maybe they're teaching the same, but they go at it in a different way.
What that doesn't show is part of my cell phone policy. This is my cell phone warning policy. It's quite effective. I rarely have to use it. I just tell my students, if I walk in your direction with this, you better put away your cell phone because it has a pretty long reach. I did not bring my cell phone enforcement policy, which is a pretty hefty mallet. So this is the warning policy. The enforcement policy is the mallet. I've never had to use it. So visual displays help set the expectations. Humor help set the expectations. I do this in the first week. That usually takes care of it. I did have to pull this out yesterday, though. But it works. If, in general, if your policies are in your syllabi and you treat everyone with the same about them, we can help you completely. We run into problems when they're not in your syllabi or you make exceptions for some people and not others, because once you make that exception, you run the possibility of getting a request for another one.
The humor piece is an important part of that because however you introduce this in the beginning, most likely, not all the time, most likely the very first session is not when we're going to see the behavior issues. So that's your chance to set the stage, talk about the policies in a relaxed, humorous way, but clearly, and help them understand I may be introducing this funny, and we may talk about funny things, or I may have funny visuals, but we're going to take it seriously because your education is important to me. And so you have a chance to kind of cushion it and couch it in that way. Then maybe on day 3 or 4 you start to see some issues. You could do a general warning to the class that says, you know what, I'm starting to see a little bit of this, whatever we talked about, and I'm going to give you all one more kind of warning, and then I'm going to start enforcing that with individual folks. And that way you're kind of trying to reinforce what you talked about, remind them, this is the class that we talked about this in, and this is what's going to happen. And then immediately, after you've done that, you have to make sure you're enforcing that with the people who are still violating specific policies. So that's this enforce the policies you establish piece, that once you have established it and you have set up an environment, you have to be willing to enforce it. And I understand. I get people that call me all the time and say, I don't really like conflict. I want to teach my content. I don't want to deal with this. I understand that. That's what we all hope, right? The utopia of education would be that you can go in and teach just your content and everybody's sitting there 100% soaking it all up. And unfortunately, the reality is they're going to challenge that. There's going to be a person or a class. It seems to be a cycle that every 10 years after you've had great classes, all of a sudden you have one terrible one where everybody in the classroom is having issues. And people will say, I haven't had this in so long. What's going on? I don't know. It's a moon cycle or something. But we want to be there for you when that happens, and we want to make sure you're prepared when that happens. So hopefully most of the stuff we talk about you don't have to use on a regular basis, but we want to make sure you have those tools when it does happen. Addressing the problem behaviors immediately is important. I put one-on-one in there because that can be something that can save the escalation of an event. If somebody is starting to break a policy and you do have to call them out individually, you don't always have the opportunity to do that one-on-one. They may be currently very disruptive and you need to at least say something about, you know, the talking needs to stop and we need to meet after class. You may have to call them out in that way, but instead of stopping and addressing the entire behavior in front of the class, try to address the behavior with them more specifically one-on-one. Definitely, I end up seeing things that have escalated when it's been addressed in front of the whole class, and a student maybe who has had disruptive behaviors in the past and maybe has a history of this feels embarrassed. Embarrassed and shame is one of the biggest feelings that lead to escalating disruptive behaviors, and that just becomes more problematic. And that often breaks a relationship. When a faculty member and a student have to get to that level, it breaks a relationship to the point where it may not be possible for that relationship to continue in the classroom. So establishing relationships with our students and then holding them accountable to our expectations are really helpful in terms of this classroom management stuff. We talked about the be consistent but flexible a little bit ago. So let's talk about what happens when the concerns are not addressed based on all of those setting the stage moments. And this is normally why people are here. A couple of things to start thinking about is you want to document. If you have given the class a warning on what Tuesday you had to give the entire class a warning about cell phone usage or whatever, just make a little note in your grade book or somewhere on the date, cell phone warning, whole class, or something of that sort. Then you have to pull out the tool to say, this particular student still got that. Maybe make a note warned this student with the stick, whatever your warning is, to keep track of what you're doing with that student. And therefore, if on day 4, they simply can't keep it together and you decide, I'm going to refer this person to code of conduct, they're not getting it, you've got an entire tracking system of what they've done, and it's super easy for me to address, why have you not learned from these warnings? Because that's really the concern at that point. You got to put the cell phone away. That I can address. But my bigger concern when they come in is, why have you not responded to the warnings from your faculty member? And trying to figure out why they are not getting it. That's a goal that I will be looking at when they meet with me. You have the early alert tool now. I don't know if you've used it yet, but if you haven't, it's in your Blackboard. There's a tab called Early Alert, and all of your students are in there. There is a flag for conduct and behavior. So it does not have to be a conduct referral to use Early Alert. It might just be an FYI that you want to make sure is documented in case it doesn't improve. So you pulled a student aside after class to talk about the constant chatter, and you said this needs to stop, or I'm going to refer you to the code of conduct. Just put that in as an FYI in Early Alert. FYI, gave the student this warning on this day. Again, it documents the situation if it were to get bigger. A lot of people will call me and say, I don't really know what I'm calling you for, Sarah, because I don't want you to do anything, but I feel like somebody should know that this happened, and they outline an interaction they've had with a student or some disruptive behavior they're afraid might get bigger. Early Alert is a great place for that. You can just put it in there. You can tell me very clearly. I'm the only one that deals with those, so every conduct behavior flag you raise comes through me. So you can almost talk to me in a sense and say, just FYI, or just want you to know, or I'm afraid this might get bigger, so, something of that sort, and I know what you're doing. The one thing to remember when you're documenting is to make sure it's objective information, not subjective information. If you want to share subjective information, feel free to call me and tell me that on the phone. But that is part of a student's record at that point, and so we want to make sure that it's objective, measurable information. The student, you don't want to say something like, the student is creeping me out, okay? Because that's a subjective feeling that you're getting. But if you can say, the student comes in late and doesn't seem to be aware of anybody when they come in, they disrupt the whole class. The student talks to themselves, while they're, while I'm teaching. The student is unaware of how their comments are affecting other students by saying this. That sort of thing. Those objective facts are what we need in that documentation. Verbal and written warnings are your best tools to really manage these things. If a student is starting to be disruptive and you have given them a warning, and you have in your syllabus, I don't know if you've noticed in Fred's syllabus statement says, I will give you warnings, and then I will fail you. So you will have the opportunity to change your behavior, and if you can't, you'll be removed from my class. Okay, you have then set up what's going to happen. You have given them warning. As long as you're giving them the warnings, you have given them the chance to change their behavior, and then we can take some action based on if they cannot change that behavior. So for instance, when a student comes to me through the code of conduct, the code outlines their due process very clearly. That's their right. When I have a referral to the code, I have a responsibility to inform them of their charges, meet with them to hear, allow them to tell me their perspective, their story in the sense of what's going on. And then I have to make a decision based on all the information I've collected about whether or not they are responsible. And if so, then I assign a sanction. And then they always have the right to appeal. Okay, so that's the due process that the student is allowed. That technically is the due process that they need to be allowed through the classroom as well if you're choosing to manage it without the code of conduct. So if you're choosing to manage your classroom, which you have the right to do, without involving the code of conduct, you simply have to make sure you're going through due process as well, because the student always has the right to appeal. Let's say Fred removes a student from his class. He says, I'm failing you because of behavior. There's no need to come back to my class. And the student challenges that and says, I want to appeal this. And they go to the department head to appeal that. The department head's going to be looking at, did the student get due process? Did Fred provide the warnings that he said he was going to provide, allow that student the opportunity to change their behavior, and then state to the student when they did not change that behavior what the outcomes were, and they had the right to appeal, which they would be going through at that point in time. As long as, if the student appeals, your actions were found to have followed that process and to be within reasonable expectations, likely your decision will be upheld. So you kind of want to be aware, if you handle it on your own, that that's kind of the process that they will be allowed. Now, a lot of people use me and as we go through the system so that it goes through code of conduct, and that's the other part that you can do. When, let's say you've given a couple of verbal warnings or you've given a written warning and the behavior hasn't changed, then you can choose to refer the student to the code of conduct. At that point in time, I will work with you to look at what is our best outcome. So I will talk with you or meet with you, and we will say, okay, you've given them these warnings, I know that, I know what behaviors we need to work on changing, I know that this is their last chance, and I will make that clear to them, and we will determine then what the outcome will be. So, for instance, this week, I have been working with a couple of students who were sent to me. I talked to the faculty member. We put those students on a behavior contract that clearly outlines what the faculty member wants. They were sent back to the classroom with the behavior contract knowing they have that last chance. Now, in the meeting with me, they discussed some things about wanting to meet with the faculty to discuss a couple of things that weren't clear to them. We set up a meeting together. The faculty member, the students, and I sat down to meet to talk through what they wanted to talk about. What was fascinating about that meeting was the student was very clear to me what she wanted to say to the faculty member. Very clear. And it had nothing to do with it had to do with a feeling that she didn't feel that all the students were being treated equally. And she had a right to make that statement to the faculty member, but she didn't think she could do it without a mediator present. I said, great, let's do that. Before the faculty member came in, the student clearly articulated that to me. Faculty member came into the room, and the student went off about not understanding why she had to work in the group she was in. It had nothing to do with what she had told me she wanted to say to that faculty member. So because I was there, I was able to say, let's back that up. This is not what we're here to talk about. We're talking now again about an expectation we've already made clear to you. This has already been made clear. We're not going to talk about that anymore. So we are able to work together as a team depending on what your experience is and how we want to move forward with handling each individual student. The hardest thing for me is, let's say the behavior has been ongoing and you have not been providing warnings specifically, and you call me in 2 months and you're so done with this student, they have pushed every button they possibly can, and you're so done and you want them out of your class. If that student has not done anything egregious, like made a threat to you or to other student safety, and they have not received any warnings, it is very hard for me to remove them from your class. Unless there was something really belligerent about their behavior. So doing that documentation early, doing the warnings early really helps in terms of how we move forward with dealing with that student. Okay, oops, I clicked the wrong button. Here we go. These are just some tips, especially those of you who have been doing this a while and are in communications, you know all these, but I like to remind folks because this is really hard to do when the student is yelling at you, especially in front of an entire class. Student gets disruptive and starts yelling, the first thing we want to do is yell back and say, you've got to be kidding, you're totally out of line, whatnot. It doesn't help us go anywhere. So the more you can do to remember the very kind of basic tips of confrontation, the better off we will be in terms of managing that as we go forward, being simple and direct, staying calm. The louder the student gets, I would encourage you to get quieter and quieter. It annoys them, and it tends to de-escalate the situation, and if it doesn't, they tend to leave because they're just annoyed that you're not getting into it with them. If you've been standing and talking to the student, you might even just want to sit down and act like you're as calm as can be. If a student is really, really riled up like that, sometimes all they need is a break, and you might need to say, I don't think we're going to be productive in this conversation right now. Why don't you leave, and we'll meet in my office tomorrow, or whatever, and give them that opportunity to leave, calm down, and then come meet you. They may leave, go to the counseling office and complain to the counselor that this experience happened, but that'll give them the time to vent in a loud voice what they need to vent at that time, and then come meet with you in a more calm way. So trying to diffuse the angry, loud student situation and deal with it later is the best. Because a lot of times it's not going anywhere. They're going around and around, and you're trying to defend something that is not even really the issue at that point in time. They need a chance to step back and calm down from that. So anything you can do to diffuse those situations better. The same student I was just talking about, he had gotten very loud with her instructor, And the instructor, trying to make her point, because this was in front of the whole class, got a little louder with her. Wasn't yelling, but got louder with her, and was being very clear and making her expectations clear. She did a great job. She ended up removing the student from the class for that time and whatnot. And I said to the student when we were meeting, she said, I can't believe she was so unprofessional that she yelled at me. And then she herself said, I know I was yelling at her, but she should have not yelled at me. And I thought that was a really fascinating expectation that she had, that I should be able to yell at her, and she's not going to raise her voice to me. It's always a learning experience talking about their expectations. But the angry, loud student, if you cannot diffuse it, if they are not taking the warnings, they do need to be removed from your classroom. That is not appropriate in the classroom setting. So this is the who to contact, what to do. There's an email on my desk that I'm trying to get in touch with this faculty member. And this student was disruptive from day one, moment one, and has continued to be disruptive and not seeming to get it. Now, it doesn't appear there's been warnings given yet, so that we need to figure out. But then by day 3, the student was obnoxiously challenging this instructor in front of the class, laughing, mocking this instructor. Absolutely not. Do not put up with that. And the instructor said, I kept going, I kept teaching my class, I tried to make it meaningful for everybody. That's impossible. All you're thinking about is this student is being disruptive and disrespectful to me. And B, all the other students are distracted too, because they recognize that student is out of line. So that cannot go on. We cannot keep students in the classroom who are being disruptive in that way. And this can be really hard, especially if the student is if you're a woman and it's a large male, or if they feel that you feel intimidated by this student. I know this is challenging, but the stronger you are and the more confident you are when you make these decisions, the better it will be. And you need to know that you have the right to say, this is not appropriate, I need you to leave my classroom today. Now, it may just have come out of nowhere. This may not have been an ongoing situation where you've given them warning, so it may not be that they're going to be removed forever. Maybe you gave them a test grade back, and they had just, gotten a divorce the night before, and this test grade just sent them over the edge, and so they flew off the handle. It may not be their typical behavior, but it's not appropriate in that moment. So you're going to ask them to leave the class. When you ask them to leave, you're giving them the choice of what's going to happen next, pretty much. You're going to say, you need to leave the class, and if you want to come back on Wednesday, you need to meet with me before then. Or you need to meet with Sara Dorer before then, okay? At any point that you have to remove a student from a class for behavior, somebody should be following up with that student before they come back in the classroom, whether it be you or me. And you can decide who that will be. If that student refuses, which some of them do, then you give them 2 more choices. You can choose to leave on your own, as I'm asking you right now, or I will call campus police to remove you. And just say it as calmly as that. And they have the choice then. If they want to sit there and let campus police remove them, they have heightened their own level of situation at that point. Most students will leave. Not all, but most of them will. It depends. Some of them, it depends on that level of shame and embarrassment that they're feeling, and they might have a pride issue going on in that moment. So it's not really about you and them necessarily trying to disrespect you. Some of it's whatever their history is and whatever's going on for them is all piled up in that moment. But do not hesitate to call the police if you feel that you are threatened or your students are threatened. Feeling any sense of threat in that classroom, call campus police. Now, it's a pretty simple walk over and call them in that situation I just explained. Say a fight breaks out in your class and you're feeling it's a lot more urgent. You don't have to remember 4010. All of your classroom phones have a code 2 button. If you hit code 2, it automatically goes to police dispatch. Now, if you don't pick up the receiver, it will be on speakerphone, which is fine if there's a fight going on. People are going to expect you're calling campus police. If it's a little bit something else that you're not so sure you want everybody to know what you've just done, you might just want to pick up the phone, hit code 2, leave the receiver off. If you don't say anything, they will automatically dispatch somebody to your classroom. Okay? Do not call me if there's a fight in progress. Call the campus police. I will not come break up the fight. I will deal with them after I get the campus police report or you've called me to tell me what happened. Absolutely, we will not send somebody back into your classroom again until it has been addressed in any of those types of extreme situations. I mentioned the counseling number because there are oftentimes too, whether it be in your office hours or random places that students disclose information to you. You're the first line there talking to our students and they may disclose thoughts of suicidality. They may disclose major life crises, and they're not holding it together very well. If you have a student in crises who you believe needs some help, you can call the counseling center, let them know you have a student in crises and that you need somebody to talk with them today. And every now and then we have faculty members walk students over to the counseling center, and that is fine if that's what you need. So know that those are your resources. I list the associate dean and the department head because really, if you are managing a situation just fine, but you kind of feel like somebody should know about the significant situation going on, always good to give your department head a heads up in case that student were to find your department head first. So it's always good to just say, hey, here's the situation I'm dealing with, here's what I've told that student so far, here's what's going on. It can be in an email, it can be in a drop-in, just let them know. But that way they know what is happening. So if, let's say, you are holding somebody to some expectations and they say, well, you're the worst teacher ever, I'm going to go complain about you. That's fine. Tell them, go ahead, because you know they're just kind of acting out on whatever's going on there. Let them go and make their complaint. But by then, the department head has heard from you what you're dealing with, so they have the full story. So when the student is going on, they can say, I'm hearing your complaint, and I understand your concern about the instructor, but let's also talk about your part in this. And you need to know that if a student brings a complaint to me about the faculty member, that's where I direct them. I let them know I can listen and I can hear it, but I don't have anything to do with faculty complaints. I'm here to address their behavior, and if they have a concern about the faculty member, they need to go through the normal chain, which would be talk to your instructor first. If you don't feel satisfied, go to the department head, etc. So that's what I would do to tell a student about where to go. All right, we want to spend a lot of time with questions and the ideas and things you're experiencing. So let us know. What questions do you have? What experiences have you had? And if you don't have any, I'm going to there you go.
This was supposed to be the good part. Well, no, I take that back. This was supposed to be
Thanks,
another good part.
Right.
Sarah, if you have a student who is impeding your physical progress, you can't get to the phone, so that person is prohibiting you from calling. What would you do in a situation like that? I mean,
Get yourself out of the situation. I would assume if they're blocking the phone, they're probably not blocking the door. I would leave. I would leave the classroom and tell somebody on your way, call 911 or call, you know what I mean? There's a million cell phones in the classroom, we know that. So ask them to pick up the phone and call. But I would, if you feel threatened, if a person is holding themselves physically between you, that's a threat. That's a threat. And I would leave that classroom environment and get to the next phone or office that you can.
So the students, you don't believe that the students would be in danger?
If you feel that the students are in danger too, I would ask them to get them leaving too. Say, tell everybody, let's get out. You know, let's get out. And because somehow you've got to get the call to campus police, and somehow you have to get out of there. But for the student to be blocking that phone, again, they would be really between you. Most of the phones are kind of off the way. Now, if they're blocking people to get out, you call campus police as soon as you can and let them know what's going on. I haven't had any kind of situation since I've been here. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but I haven't had any situation since I've been here where somebody was that posturing themselves physically in that threatening kind of a manner. Safety comes up a lot, obviously. That is a good segue to just mention the see something, say something, because the behavioral intervention team is in existence. We haven't done a whole lot of marketing around it. You should see more about that in the fall. But, a lot of people are talking about it actually since the Tucson shooting. People are really aware of the fact that community colleges and all colleges have these teams that look at behaviors of concern, and we do as well. And so we take referrals from anybody in the community who has a concern and says, maybe a student will call us and say, this student just put this on their Facebook, and I'm really concerned that they are going to do something and hurt somebody. That's our job to look into that. Maybe it's nothing. Most of the time it's nothing, but maybe it's something. And so we do look into that, and we hope to prevent big issues based on that. Obviously, if there is a threatening situation at any point, do your absolute best to get to the campus police and get everybody, yourself and the students, out of any possible harm's way.
A tip that occurred to me as Sarah was speaking was when you mentioned returning tests and grades, which seems to trigger emotional responses sometimes. To avoid problems or move them to another time work. So, for example, when I return papers, I never return them at the beginning of class. I always return them at the end of class and ask them to read my comments and then talk to me afterwards, hopefully in my office. So we just remove the whole emotional response from the classroom.
It's interesting that you say that, because Littrens very clearly says that too, that you must read my comments before I'll discuss your grade with you. So to make them take the time to sit down and look at what you've said is good. Other questions? Holly, did you have a question or a thought? Okay. Other experiences you're having? Yeah.
If you have a student who's on, or is identified with the disability support services, and this person is just showing little tendencies that this is going to escalate, should I contact them or you?
This is a great question, and we have a couple of counselors in the room, so feel free to jump in if you have a different opinion from what I say. You can contact them or me. We tend to work together depending on the situation. It depends on what you're seeing, and let me explain. We have a number of students who are going to come in and they're going to be registered through disability support, and they're going to have accommodations, and they should be letting you know what those are and what they're getting. Having a disability that they are getting accommodations for does not give them permission to act inappropriately in the classroom. They still have to act within the same educational environment as all of our other students. Now, for some of them, that's harder. And so it does not give them an excuse, but for some of them, we will work more specifically to really help them. When I talk about being clear with expectations, for some of our students on disability, through disability support, we need to be crystal clear. I mean, very, very crystal clear. And so if you're seeing behavior concerns based on potentially whatever disability they're working with, your first step really could be, if they have told you they have these accommodations, to call the disability support office and try to talk to that person's counselor. Say, here's a student I'm working with, I'd like to talk with their counselor, because what that counselor can do, they can give you advice and tips on working with that particular student, things that we know that the student is successful when, kind of thing. And they can kind of help you in terms of knowing how to work with that student in a certain environment. Because for some of them, it's something very simple. Maybe they need to have a clue or cue with you about when they do need to get up and leave the room for some reason. And you need to have a way that they can do that without being disruptive, and they can still take care of whatever maybe anxiety they're dealing with or something. So there can be exceptions. When we talk about being consistent but making exceptions, there could be some exceptions to help that particular student be successful in the classroom that are minor enough that you can live with them, But obviously, if they are just being disruptive and they don't seem to have any sense of that, we need to address that. And so sometimes they'll come in and meet with the counselor, sometimes they'll come in and meet with me, sometimes we all meet together and we talk about, okay, here's the behavior that you need to have in the classroom, here's what you're having. Now, a lot of times the student doesn't even get it. They can't truly connect how their behavior is impacting the classroom. And so that's our goal, is to help them make that connection and to give them the examples of what that needs to look like. A lot of times in those cases, we put them on behavior contracts. And that behavior contract would not just say you need to be respectful in the classroom. It would say you may not get up to talk to the instructor until the end of class. Any questions you have need to be written down and saved to the end of class or break. That sort of thing, because it's things that they just are having a hard time on their own understanding that social piece of it. Okay.
Another scenario we often see is contact not from Sara first, but from a department head or dean secretary. In those cases, the faculty members come to us and they said, the student had an issue with conduct and went to a department head or dean. Why not to me? And my response usually is you've got to really establish that early too, and empower your students and encourage your students to bring their concerns to you first. And it's one of those things you can cut off. They often don't because they feel fear of retribution, and you just have to reassure them, come to me first, we'll resolve it. You don't have to go to a department head or a dean.
It's so true. They don't necessarily see you as human. You are the faculty member, and you have a lot of power in that classroom, whether or not you feel it or not. They have this perception, and they do have some fear around addressing concerns with their faculty members. So the more open you are at the beginning, the more you set that stage, the more willing they will be to do that. Yeah. Other questions?
I have a lot to say on this subject, but I'll try to be brief. I know that all situations are really different, but I do kind of wonder about how many warnings that you give people. Right now I have it set up where I consider the first day the warning. So that's it, that's your warning. And then I do some point deduction. And then if it continues, I send them to you. And I just say, you need to work out how you can handle this with someone else. But it's harder to enforce, of course, than it is to state. So I know there's probably not a general rule, but what do you do? What do other people do in terms of giving people how many chances?
Let's let some others respond, and then I can too.
I can respond first. In my syllabus, I don't specify the number of warnings. Typically, it's only taken one. I can only recall one occasion when I actually reached a written warning, when these students just kept talking during class. I think I might have warned them verbally at least a couple times, maybe 3 times, and then I did do a written warning. I said, this is it. You keep this up, you fail, and you shouldn't come to class anymore. But I don't specify in my syllabus the number. I kind of like having that flexibility depending upon the severity of the conduct, really. Anybody else want to address that? Lip?
I do want to let you know that I teach developmental writing, so which is why there's the 3-page behavior statement. I always like to give students a warning because I am aware that students are not always aware that how their behavior is being perceived and that it is disruptive. So I believe that that gives them the opportunity to become aware of what it is they're doing and also to explain to them why it is disruptive. Because I think something that's sometimes lost in all of this, you may have one student who's disruptive, but you have a class of 21 plus other students who are sitting there waiting for you and for your instruction while you are focusing on the 1 or 2 students who are not. So what I like to do is to give a verbal warning first. And that's usually as discreet as I can by walking over or sometimes calling the student out. And then I tell them, this is your first warning. And with Fred, depending on what we're doing in class, because usually it's the students, for me, who are struggling the most. And if I just put them out without a warning, they're losing that instruction, and I'm afraid that they won't come back. But when I've reached my end, and usually that's probably the second warning, I will say, this is your last warning, no more. And last semester, I did reach that with a student who was actually failing the class. She was failing because she was texting. So I said, this is your first warning. I gave her a second warning. The third time I said, I've warned you twice. You know what the syllabus policy is. What do you think should happen to you when you look at your behavior, when you look at the fact that you've been given 2 warnings? What should happen? She said, well, I said, what does the syllabus state? That I will have to leave the class. I said, so what are you going to do? She says, I have to leave. There were tears in her eyes, and I knew that affected her. She packed her things and she left. I sent then an early alert warning, reminding her in written form of what the behavior was and that she had to come and speak to me before the start of the next class. I only put her out for that class session. When she came in the next morning, all the other students came in. I spoke to her one-on-one. I explained to her. And again, as Sara said, she believed that texting in class should be allowed. I don't see what's wrong with it. I've always texted. Other faculty members don't have problems with it. You seem to be the only one who has problems with it. I pay for this class. I should be able to come and text. And so there's where my teachable moment was to explain to her and how that affected the other students. So I said, it seems to me from this conversation that you're not actually getting it. And so to help you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type up a contract which you are going to sign. It is going to say that if you take out your phone to look at it, to touch it, to kiss it, to caress it, to see that it's there, you will no longer be allowed in this class. And I did. I typed it up. She signed it. I gave her a copy, and I kept the copy. She never touched her cell phone for the rest of the semester.
I think my hammer is much simpler. I've never had to use the hammer.
Does anybody else have examples of what they've done with those? I am a big believer in at least the verbal warning and then potentially followed up with the written warning, because the written warning can tell them then what will happen then if it happens again. That's your kind of final option. So, and of course, you have to base it on the potential offense too. So a cell phone texting might get more warnings than I'm going to be loud and disruptive and yelling in class at inappropriate times. Obviously, that may be a one-time and then you're out kind of thing, So you kind of have to base it on what the situation is. The student this week that I was dealing with one of your colleagues, she refused to do what was being asked of her by the faculty member. She did not comply with the instruction in the classroom. She was asked to leave the class that day. That's it. We're going to give you one written warning at this point. You're going to understand any other times like that, you'll be out. But texting might, while it does disrupt and we don't want them to, it may not be at that same level that you're going to kick them out right away. Again, kind of if you think about it again in terms of that focus of the education of the student, educating them to function appropriately, education is their goal here, helping them reach those goals and framing it in that way and determining how disruptive is the student to my classroom and to the others around them, and then how many warnings might I give them. So you just kind of have to follow your gut and follow your syllabus. Litron's statement at the end of all of her policies has what she will do if you can't follow the policies. And one of her comments is, remember, you have paid for this opportunity to be a student in class, but that payment does not give you the right to disrupt the class in any manner. So when they're throwing those comments at you, she's got it right here. You could use that comment to me, but I'm going to tell you right away that that's not going to work here. So having your thoughts about how you're going to talk to students about that is important. And just talking with them about these things makes a huge difference. If you call them, when you call them on it and you talk with them about it and they can't improve, you send them to me. And when you send them to me, if you've already given them a written warning that says you're done on the next time and I'm going to give you a conduct referral, you need to let me know that. If you send them to me and you've already told them they may never come back to class, I need to know that, because most of the time when students come to me, that's kind of their final warning. That then we're going to send them back to the class with one more chance. So if you don't want that, or if you have already decided I can't have the student in my class, I need to know that when I'm addressing the student. And I will tell you, it is hard for me to be the one to enforce that if you have not talked to them. If you have not addressed the student and the behavior and really told them that you don't want them there, I'm working on one of those right now. It is very hard for me to be the one to send that message because I haven't been there to see it. So the student will say, but this, and but that, and but that, and all I can really go on is, this is what the faculty member is telling me, because I haven't been there to observe those behaviors.
And there are also variations within departments. So when I listen to this conversation, it would be different if it were a question from culinary arts where they have knives, or the science labs, or wellness. So the whole question of warning and the number of warnings and the severity of it is going to vary a lot from department to department.
That is so very true.
What else?
Well, I understand why the one-on-one discussion is important. I guess that's one of the pieces that I struggle with the most. What I've used in the past and what tends to work for me is if someone is not behaving in an appropriate manner, I simply stop talking and look at them. And while that's not, quietly pulling them aside, if I'm in the middle of a lecture, I find it difficult to try to quietly pull someone aside. I also try on the first day of class to explain to students that if I had to list all of those things that were not appropriate for classroom behavior, my syllabus would in fact be 20 pages long. And then I tell them that it's not appropriate to lay on the floor during class time, because that was one experience that I had with a student, and I immediately thought there was a medical problem, and he was in the back row and he was laying on the floor, and so I did shout out to him to find out if he was all right, And he responded with, yes, my back just hurt, so I'm trying to stretch it out. And I said, get back in your seat, please. That's not appropriate. So, you know, I do tend to call people on their behavior and not pull them aside one-on-one.
Well, and I'll let others comment on that too. And that's, again, that's fine. You have to find what works for you. So a big part of this is really just talking about you have to find your voice, you have to find your policies, you have to figure out how you're going to enforce them. And if that works for you, then that's the way to move forward with it. You know, I think with the one-on-one especially, it's not necessarily in those little moments where things are happening in the classroom. It's more of the bigger things that I guess I'm really referring to, even in that sense where somebody is so disruptive that you really need, it's not even appropriate, it wouldn't be an appropriate conversation for the other students to hear. That's one of those that would be more embarrassing for them to really hear, but this is, you know, what's going on with you? Why are you acting this way? You know, that sort of thing. So that makes sense. Right, right. And everybody has it, you know, is it Litrin, are you the one that wakes students up when they're sleeping? Somebody, yeah, so everybody has, you know, like and that's going to be something, obviously everybody's going to see you go over and sit down and talk to that student. You know, a lot of people will just sit and wait for that student. You know, everybody has their style. You have to find your style, and that's just fine. It's just keeping it all in mind depending on the situation that comes up. Anybody else have comments about that, managing things in the moment?
All right, well, we're at the end of our scheduled hour. You're welcome to stick around and ask questions individually. Thank you for attending.
Feel free to contact me with questions about individual students at any point, even if if you don't want me to handle it and you just want to process what you're doing, I can always be a part of those conversations.